Marcus Chun drifted through the void in his damaged escape pod, watching the fuel gauge tick toward zero. 3 days ago, the research vessel Meridian had been ambushed by Keth raiders while conducting mineral surveys in the Outer Rim. The attack came without warning, tearing through the ship's hull like paper. Marcus barely made it to an escape pod before the vessel's reactor went critical. Now he floated in the darkness between stars, his pod's distress beacon silent to avoid detection. The Keth were still hunting survivors. Through the small porthole, Marcus could see debris from his ship scattered across space like metallic confetti. Bodies of his crewmates tumbled slowly past his pod, their faces frozen in expressions of shock and terror. The pod's proximity alarm chimed softly. Marcus pressed himself against the porthole and peered into the darkness. A massive shadow moved against the starfield, blocking out entire constellations. The Keth hunting ship was at least 2 kilometers long, its hull covered in angular armor plating that absorbed light. Weapon ports dotted its surface like infected wounds. Marcus held his breath as the ship's searchlights swept past his pod. The escape pods were designed with stealth coating, but at close range, even the best technology had limits. The lights moved away, then suddenly snapped back. A brilliant beam illuminated his pod, turning the cramped interior into a fishbowl. Found another one. Came a voice through the communication system, translated by the pod's computer into heavily accented English. Weak little human still breathing. The Keth had been expanding their territory for decades, enslaving or killing anyone who stood in their way. Humans were relatively new to galactic politics, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years earlier. Most alien species considered them primitive and weak, useful only as laborers or entertainment. A tractor beam locked onto Marcus's pod, dragging him toward the hunting ship's docking bay. Through the porthole, he could see other escape pods already captured, their hulls cracked open like eggs. The Keth preferred to take prisoners alive for their gladiatorial arenas, but they weren't particularly careful about keeping them healthy during transport. The pod clanged against metal decking as it was deposited in the docking bay. Marcus could hear the hiss of atmosphere being pumped into the bay, followed by heavy footsteps on metal grating. The pod's outer door exploded inward, torn off its hinges by massive clawed hands. A Keth warrior peered into the pod, its reptilian head nearly filling the opening. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick scales that shifted from brown to green depending on the light. Its eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and its mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing meat. The warrior wore armor made from the bones of various creatures, including what looked like human skulls. "This one's awake," the warrior growled, reaching into the pod with arms as thick as tree trunks. "Good. The arena masters prefer prey that can run." Marcus didn't resist as the warrior dragged him from the pod. Fighting would only get him killed immediately, and he needed time to assess the situation. The docking bay was filled with similar warriors, all examining captured humans like farmers inspecting livestock. Most of the prisoners were unconscious or injured, but a few were awake and screaming. The warriors shoved Marcus toward a group of other survivors who had been herded into a corner of the bay. He recognized Dr. Sarah Kim from the Meridian's biology department and Engineer Jake Rodriguez from the engine crew. Both looked terrified but uninjured. There were maybe 20 humans total, out of the Meridian's crew of 200. "Welcome to hell," whispered Dr. Kim as Marcus joined the group. "They've been asking questions about our ship's cargo manifest. I think they're looking for something specific." Marcus nodded slightly, trying not to attract attention from their captors. The Meridian had been carrying more than just survey equipment. Hidden in the ship's secured storage was a prototype quantum processor that could revolutionize computer technology. If the Keth got their hands on it, they could use it to break human encryption systems and gain a massive tactical advantage. A new Keth entered the docking bay, this one wearing more elaborate armor decorated with gemstones and precious metals. The warrior chieftain was even larger than the others, with scars covering its visible scales. When it spoke, the other Keth immediately fell silent. "I am war leader Thax," the chieftain announced, its voice carrying easily across the bay. "You pathetic humans are now property of the Keth Empire. Some of you will fight in our arenas for the entertainment of true warriors. Others will serve as laborers until you die from exhaustion. A few might even survive long enough to breed more slaves." The chieftain walked among the prisoners, examining each one like a predator selecting prey. When it reached Marcus, it stopped and tilted its head curiously. "This one has the look of a fighter," Thax said, circling Marcus slowly. "Small and weak like all humans, but there's something in its eyes. Yes, this one will do well in the arena." The crowds enjoy watching clever prey try to escape their fate. Marcus kept his expression neutral, even as his mind raced. He had served 10 years in the human colonial marines before joining the research corps, but he doubted the Keth knew about his military background. To them, all humans probably looked the same, soft, weak, and helpless. The prisoners were forced into a cargo hold that had been converted into a temporary prison. The walls were lined with force fields that delivered painful shocks to anyone who touched them. Food and water were provided in quantities just sufficient to keep them alive, but barely. The Keth wanted their prizes healthy enough to fight, but weak enough to remain docile. Over the next several days, Marcus learned more about his captors by observing their routines. The Keth were warriors by culture, valuing strength and brutality above all else. They had conquered dozens of species through sheer aggression, using capture technology to enhance their own capabilities. Their ships were stolen designs improved with weapons from various conquered civilizations. The hunting vessel carried a crew of nearly 300 Keth warriors, plus support staff from enslaved species. The ship's primary purpose was to raid frontier settlements and capture slaves for the arena circuits that operated throughout Keth space. It was one of dozens of similar vessels in their fleet. Dr. Kim had managed to overhear conversations between their guards, thanks to her linguistics background. She reported that the Keth were indeed searching for the quantum processor from the Meridian. They knew it existed, but hadn't been able to locate it among the ship's wreckage. "They're planning to torture the survivors until someone tells them where it is," she whispered during one of their brief rest periods. "If they can't find it, they'll assume it was destroyed in the explosion." Marcus nodded grimly. The processor had been hidden in a shielded compartment that would survive most explosions, but only he knew the exact location. As the mission security officer, he had been responsible for protecting the device. The Keth would eventually figure out that someone among the prisoners knew where it was hidden. The ship's destination was a Keth stronghold called Bloodtooth Station, where the prisoners would be processed for sale to various arena circuits. The journey would take 2 weeks through hyperspace, giving Marcus time to plan. He began studying the guards' routines, mapping the ship's layout during their brief trips to the sanitation facilities, and identifying potential weapons or tools. The Keth were overconfident, treating their human prisoners as harmless animals rather than potential threats. They posted minimal guards and relied mainly on the force field barriers to keep prisoners contained. Their weapons were crude, but effective. Energy clubs that could stun or kill, depending on the setting, and projectile weapons that fired poison darts. Marcus also observed that the Keth had a rigid social hierarchy based on combat prowess. The larger, more scarred warriors commanded respect from their smaller peers. Challenges to authority were settled through ritual combat, with the loser either dying or being demoted to menial duties. This gave Marcus an idea for how to gain access to restricted areas of the ship. On the 5th day of their journey, the opportunity he had been waiting for presented itself. During the daily feeding, one of the younger Keth guards made a mistake with the force field controls, temporarily weakening the barrier. Most of the prisoners didn't even notice, but Marcus saw the telltale flicker that indicated a power fluctuation. That night, while the other prisoners slept, Marcus worked on widening a small crack in the ship's hull, plating near their holding area. The metal was old and corroded, weakened by years of combat damage and poor maintenance. Using a broken piece of meal container as a tool, he managed to create a gap just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The ship's maintenance corridors were dark and cramped, barely large enough for a human to crawl through. Marcus moved carefully, following the air circulation ducts toward what he hoped was the ship's armory. The Keth built their vessels with little regard for efficiency, resulting in a maze of redundant passages and forgotten storage areas. After an hour of careful navigation, Marcus found himself looking down into a storage room filled with captured weapons and equipment. Most of it was junk, but he spotted several items that could be useful. A damaged plasma cutter could be rigged into an improvised weapon. Some electronic components could be used to disrupt the force field generators. Best of all, he found a case of human military rations that had apparently been overlooked by their captors. Marcus spent the rest of the night carefully relocating useful items to a hidden cache in the maintenance tunnels. He had to be back in the holding area before the morning feeding, but he now had the tools he needed to begin his real work. The next morning, War Leader Thax arrived to inspect the prisoners personally. The chieftain seemed agitated, pacing back and forth while barking orders at subordinates. Dr. Kim managed to catch fragments of the conversation and reported that they were approaching Keth space, but had encountered unexpected patrol activity from human naval forces. It seems the Colonial Navy is taking the loss of the Meridian more seriously than expected, she whispered to Marcus. They're conducting search and rescue operations throughout this sector. Marcus felt a spark of hope. If human forces were actively searching for survivors, there might be a chance for rescue. But he couldn't count on outside help arriving in time. The Keth ship would reach Bloodtooth Station in less than a week, and once the prisoners were dispersed to various arenas, any chance of coordinated rescue would disappear. That evening, Marcus made his second trip into the maintenance tunnels. This time, he worked his way toward the ship's communication array. If he could access the main transmitter, he might be able to send a distress signal with the ship's precise location. The risk was enormous. If caught outside the holding area, he would be killed immediately. The communication center was heavily guarded, with at least 6 Keth warriors on duty at all times. Marcus spent hours observing their patrol patterns from a ventilation grate above the room. The guards were alert but predictable, following the same routes every 30 minutes. There was a brief window when all 6 guards would be facing away from the main console, but it would last only about 10 seconds. Marcus waited until the small hours of the ship's night cycle, when most of the crew would be sleeping. He dropped silently from the ventilation grate behind the communications console and began working with practiced efficiency. The Keth used stolen technology from dozens of different species, resulting in a confusing mixture of incompatible systems. Fortunately, the main transmitter was based on human designs captured from previous raids. In 8 seconds, Marcus managed to activate an emergency beacon and upload the ship's navigation data to a burst transmission. The signal would be brief and difficult to detect, but any human vessels in the area would recognize it as a distress call. He climbed back into the ventilation system just as the guards completed their patrol circuit. The next morning brought chaos. War Leader Thax stormed into the holding area, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. Behind him came several warriors carrying neural probe devices used for interrogation. "One of you pathetic creatures has been crawling through my ship like a parasite," the chieftain roared. "When I find which one, I will personally tear off its limbs and feed them to the others as an example." Marcus kept his expression blank as Thax studied each prisoner. The war leader's gaze lingered on him for a moment, but moved on without stopping. The neural probes were crude devices that could read surface thoughts, but required direct contact to be effective. "Perhaps a demonstration of consequences will loosen tongues," Thax said, grabbing Engineer Rodriguez at random. "This one looks weak enough to break quickly." The neural probe was pressed against Rodriguez's temple, causing him to scream in agony as the device invaded his mind. Marcus had to clench his fists to keep from moving, knowing that any action would only make things worse for everyone. After several minutes of torture, Thax released Rodriguez, who collapsed unconscious. The war leader looked disappointed that the engineer knew nothing useful. The next time someone leaves the holding area without permission, I will execute 5 prisoners, Thax announced. Choose your actions carefully, humans. Your lives depend on good behavior. As the Keth warriors left, Dr. Kim moved to check on Rodriguez. The engineer was breathing, but unconscious, with blood trickling from his ears where the neural probe had made contact. We have to do something, she whispered urgently. They're going to torture all of us until someone breaks. Marcus nodded grimly. His distress signal had been sent, but there was no guarantee it had been received. Even if human forces were en route, they might not arrive before the Keth ship reached its destination. He needed to accelerate his timeline and take more aggressive action. That night, Marcus made his most dangerous journey yet into the ship's depths. This time, his destination was the engine room, where he hoped to cause enough damage to force the vessel out of hyperspace. If he could strand the ship in normal space, any pursuing human forces would have a better chance of finding them. The engine room was a cathedral of stolen technology, with massive power conduits running along the walls like metallic arteries. The main reactor was a fusion plant of human design, probably captured from one of the first colonies to fall to Keth raiders. Marcus had trained on similar systems during his military service and knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The sabotage had to be subtle. Obvious damage would be repaired quickly, but a gradual power fluctuation might go unnoticed until it was too late. Marcus worked carefully, adjusting coolant flow rates and introducing minor variations in the magnetic containment fields. The changes would cascade over several hours, eventually forcing an emergency shutdown of the hyperdrive. As he prepared to leave, Marcus heard footsteps approaching the engine room. He quickly concealed himself behind a bank of power regulators as 2 Keth engineers entered to perform routine maintenance. They were smaller than the warriors, but still deadly dangerous if they discovered his presence. The engineers worked for nearly an hour, checking readings and replacing worn components. Marcus remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing and tried to ignore the cramped position that was causing his legs to go numb. Finally, the Keth finished their work and departed, leaving him alone with the quietly humming machinery. Marcus returned to the holding area just before dawn, his body aching from the night's exertions. He had done everything possible to help their situation, but now came the hardest part, waiting to see if his sabotage would work and preparing for whatever came next. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Marcus watched the guards for any sign that problems had been detected, but the Keth seemed focused on their normal routines. Dr. Kim reported that some of the other prisoners were showing signs of psychological breakdown, unable to cope with the stress of captivity and the constant threat of torture. That evening, Marcus felt the ship's vibrations change slightly. The steady thrum of the hyperdrive engines developed a subtle irregularity that most people wouldn't notice, but his military training had taught him to recognize the signs of mechanical problems. His sabotage was taking effect. 3 hours later, alarms began sounding throughout the vessel. The ship dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that threw everyone against the walls. Emergency lighting activated as the main power grid fluctuated. Through the holding area's small porthole, Marcus could see stars instead of the twisted streaks of hyperspace. War leader Thax's voice echoed through the ship's communication system, barking orders in the Keth language. Dr. Kim translated what she could catch. Engine failure. All engineering teams to the reactor room. Prepare for emergency repairs. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The Keth would eventually get their engines working again, but it would take time. Time for human forces to find them, and time for him to put the next phase of his plan into action. The real hunt was about to begin. The ship drifted helplessly in space for 6 hours while Keth engineering teams worked frantically to repair the hyperdrive. Marcus could hear them through the ship's walls, their harsh voices growing more agitated as each repair attempt failed. His sabotage had been more effective than hoped. The cascade failures were triggering secondary malfunctions throughout the power grid. During the confusion, Marcus retrieved the supplies he had hidden in the maintenance tunnels. The plasma cutter, electronic components, and rations would be essential for what came next. He also found something unexpected in his cache, a small medical scanner that had apparently fallen from the Keth cargo during transport. The device was designed for treating wounded arena fighters, but Marcus saw other possibilities. Dr. Kim noticed his improved alertness during the morning feeding. "You look like someone who has a plan," she whispered while pretending to examine Rodriguez, who was still recovering from the neural probe interrogation. "Maybe," Marcus replied quietly. "But it's going to get worse before it gets better. When things start happening, keep everyone down and away from the force field barriers." The opportunity Marcus had been waiting for came that afternoon. War leader Thax arrived at the holding area with a squad of warriors, clearly frustrated by the engine problems. The chieftain was looking for someone to blame for their troubles, and the human prisoners made convenient targets. "One of you vermin is responsible for this," Thax growled, pacing in front of the force field barrier. "My engineers found evidence of sabotage in the reactor systems. Someone will confess, or I will begin executing prisoners until the guilty party reveals themselves." Marcus stepped forward before any of the other prisoners could speak. "I did it," he said calmly. "I damaged your engines." Thax's yellow eyes widened with surprise. Most captured humans cowered when confronted by Keth warriors, but Marcus stood straight and met the war leader's gaze without flinching. "Impossible," one of the other warriors snarled. "Humans are too weak and stupid to understand our technology." "Your technology is stolen from dozens of different species," Marcus replied, "including my own. The fusion reactor in your engine room is based on a human design from the Tau Ceti colonies. I served on ships with identical systems for 10 years before joining the research corps." War leader Thax studied Marcus with new interest. "So the soft little researcher has claws after all. Very well, human. You'll have the honor of fighting in my personal arena instead of being sold to the slave markets. I want to see how long you survive against a true warrior." The chieftain gestured to his guards, who deactivated the force field just long enough to drag Marcus from the holding area. As he was hauled away, Marcus caught Dr. Kim's eye and nodded slightly. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The ship's arena was located in the vessel's central section, a circular chamber surrounded by observation decks where off-duty Keth warriors could watch fights for entertainment. The floor was covered with sand that had been stained dark with the blood of previous combatants. Weapon racks lined the walls, displaying an assortment of blades, clubs, and exotic weapons taken from conquered civilizations. Marcus was thrown into a preparation chamber beneath the arena floor. The room was barely large enough for him to stand upright, with walls covered in scratches left by previous prisoners. A small slot in the door provided the only light, casting harsh shadows across the cramped space. Hours passed before the door opened again. A Keth guard entered carrying a tray of food and a cup of water. The warrior was smaller than most, probably a junior member assigned to menial duties. "Eat," the guard commanded in broken English. "War leader wants you strong for the fight. No honor in defeating starving prey." Marcus accepted the food gratefully, though he noticed it contained more protein and vitamins than the usual prisoner rations. The Keth wanted their entertainment to last as long as possible. As the guard turned to leave, Marcus made his move. The plasma cutter, rigged as a crude weapon, was hidden in his sleeve. In one smooth motion, Marcus grabbed the guard's weapon arm and pressed the device against the Keth's neck. The makeshift weapon wasn't powerful enough to cut through the warrior's thick scales, but the energy discharge was sufficient to disrupt the creature's nervous system. The guard collapsed unconscious before he could cry for help. Marcus quickly stripped the warrior of his armor and weapons, working with the efficiency of long military training. The armor was too large for him, but the energy club and dart pistol would serve his purposes. The next phase of Marcus's plan required precise timing. He had observed the ship's routine during his captivity and knew that the arena fights were typically scheduled for the evening shift when most of the crew would be off duty. That gave him perhaps 2 hours to work while the corridors were relatively empty. Using the unconscious guard's access codes, Marcus made his way through the ship's lower decks toward the armory. The Keth kept their best weapons locked away from the general crew, accessible only to senior warriors and ship's officers. If Marcus was going to have any chance against his captors, he needed better equipment than an improvised plasma cutter. The armory was guarded by 2 Keth warriors who were more interested in their dice game than watching for intruders. Marcus waited in the shadows until one guard left to use the sanitation facilities, then struck quickly. The remaining warrior was unconscious before he knew what hit him, felled by a precise blow from the energy club set to its lowest setting. Inside the armory, Marcus found a treasure trove of captured weapons. Human military rifles stood next to Zentari energy cannons and Scorian plasma grenades. Most impressive was a suit of powered armor designed for human use, probably taken from a colonial marine unit during one of the recent raids. Marcus quickly donned the powered armor, feeling the familiar sensation as the suit systems came online. The armor was older than what he had used during his service, but the basic controls were the same. Built-in weapon systems, enhanced strength and speed, and armor plating that could deflect most small arms fire. Exactly what he needed to even the odds against his Keth captors. He selected additional weapons carefully, choosing items that would be effective in close-quarters combat. A human assault rifle with armor-piercing rounds, several plasma grenades, and a vibroblade that could cut through most materials. The suit's built-in computer helped him plan routes through the ship that would avoid heavily populated areas. The first target was the ship's communication center. If Marcus could control the vessel's transmitters, he could coordinate with any human forces that might be responding to his earlier distress signal. The route required passing through several crew quarters, but most of the Keth were either sleeping or gathered in the common areas. Marcus moved through the ship like a ghost, the powered armor's sound dampening systems masking his footsteps. When he encountered isolated crew members, they were unconscious or dead before they could raise an alarm. The Keth were physically powerful, but relied on intimidation rather than tactical skill, making them vulnerable to a trained soldier with proper equipment. The communication center had been reinforced since his earlier infiltration, with additional guards and sensor systems. Marcus bypassed most of the defenses by cutting through an exterior bulkhead with his vibroblade, creating his own entrance directly into the transmitter room. The 6 guards inside barely had time to react before Marcus opened fire with the assault rifle. Armor-piercing rounds tore through their improvised cover, downing 4 warriors in the first seconds of combat. The remaining 2 managed to return fire, but their energy weapons couldn't penetrate the powered armor. With the communication center secured, Marcus activated the ship's long-range transmitters and began broadcasting on human military frequencies. His message was brief, but contained all the essential information: ship location, prisoner status, and enemy strength. Any colonial Navy vessels in the area would respond immediately to a distress call from captured personnel. The next objective was the ship's power grid. If Marcus could disable the main generators, the Keth would be unable to repair their hyperdrive or mount an effective defense against rescue forces. The route to the reactor room led through the ship's central corridor, where he would inevitably encounter heavy resistance. Marcus had barely left the communication center when the ship's alarms began sounding. His attack had finally been discovered, and war leader Thax's voice echoed through the corridors as he rallied his warriors for a counterattack. "The human parasite has escaped," the war leader roared. "Find it and bring me its head. Any warrior who kills the intruder will receive double shares of the next raid's profits." The corridors filled with armed Keth as the crew responded to their leader's call. Marcus found himself facing overwhelming numbers, but the powered armor gave him advantages his enemies couldn't match. He moved faster than they expected, struck from unexpected angles, and disappeared into the ship's maze of passages before they could coordinate an effective response. The running battle through the ship's corridors was fierce but brief. Marcus used the environment to his advantage, triggering explosions in fuel storage areas and causing power failures that plunged sections of the ship into darkness. The Keth were brave fighters, but lacked experience with opponents who could match their physical capabilities. When Marcus reached the reactor room, he found it defended by war leader Thax himself and a squad of elite warriors. The chieftain had armed himself with a massive warhammer crackling with energy fields, while his guards carried weapons that could punch through starship hulls. "So the little human has fangs after all," Thax growled, raising his warhammer. "Good. I was growing tired of opponents who died too easily." The battle in the reactor room was the fiercest combat Marcus had experienced since his military service. Thax was an experienced warrior who had conquered dozens of worlds, and his guards were veterans of countless arena fights. The powered armor kept Marcus alive through the first exchanges, but he was outnumbered and running low on ammunition. The turning point came when Marcus used one of his plasma grenades to damage a coolant conduit. Superheated gas erupted from the broken pipe, forcing the Keth warriors to seek cover while scalding mist filled the chamber. In the confusion, Marcus managed to reach the main reactor controls. The fusion plant safety systems were designed to prevent catastrophic failures, but Marcus had enough technical knowledge to override the safeguards. Instead of causing an explosion that would kill everyone aboard, he triggered a controlled shutdown that would leave the ship completely powerless. Without energy for life support or weapons, the Keth would be helpless against any rescue force. War leader Thax realized what was happening and charged through the scalding mist, his warhammer raised for a killing blow. Marcus met the attack with his vibroblade, the two weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. The Keth chieftain was stronger, but the powered armor enhanced Marcus's speed and reflexes enough to keep him alive. The duel ranged across the reactor room as both fighters sought any advantage. Thax's warhammer could shatter armor plating, while Marcus's vibroblade could cut through the chieftain's scales if he could land a solid hit. Around them, the ship's power systems began failing as the reactor shutdown sequence continued. In the end, it was cunning rather than strength that decided the battle. Marcus feigned a stumble that left him apparently vulnerable to attack. When Thax lunged forward for the killing blow, Marcus rolled aside and drove his vibroblade into a critical power coupling. The resulting electrical discharge was channeled directly into the chieftain's warhammer, electrocuting him instantly. With their leader dead and the ship powerless, the remaining Keth warriors lost all will to fight. Marcus made his way back to the holding area where the other prisoners were being kept, finding them still alive, but terrified by the sounds of battle echoing through the ship. "It's over," he announced as he deactivated the force field barriers. "We're going home." Dr. Kim stared at him in amazement. "What happened to you? You look like some kind of super soldier." Marcus gestured to the powered armor. "Sometimes the best way to beat a hunter is to become a better predator." He activated the suit's communication system and sent another message on human military frequencies. "This is Sergeant Marcus Chun, Colonial Marine Reserve, requesting immediate evacuation for 23 survivors aboard a disabled Keth vessel." The response came within minutes. "Sergeant Chun, this is Captain Morrison aboard the CNS Defiance. We have your location and are moving to intercept. Estimated arrival in 4 hours." As they waited for rescue, Marcus organized the prisoners to secure the ship and tend to the wounded. The surviving Keth crew members were confined to their quarters under guard, though most seemed more interested in mourning their dead war leader than causing further trouble. Engineer Rodriguez, recovered from his ordeal with the neural probe, helped Marcus download data from the ship's computers. The information included the locations of Keth bases, slave markets, and planned raids against human colonies. Intelligence that could save thousands of lives and help the colonial navy strike back against their enemies. When the CNS Defiance arrived, its Marines found the Keth hunting vessel completely secure and its human prisoners in good condition. Captain Morrison personally greeted the survivors as they were brought aboard his ship. "Sergeant Chun," the captain said, studying the after-action report Marcus had prepared. "According to this, you single-handedly captured an enemy vessel and eliminated its entire command structure. That's either the most remarkable military action I've ever seen, or the most creative fiction. Marcus smiled grimly. Sometimes people underestimate what humans can do when they're properly motivated, sir. The Keth learned that lesson the hard way. The intelligence gathered from the captured ship led to a series of colonial navy raids that crippled Keth operations in the sector. The surviving crew members, faced with imprisonment or cooperation, provided detailed information about their empire's military capabilities and strategic plans. As for Marcus, he returned to his research work, but remained on active reserve status with the colonial marines. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and humanity would need every advantage in the conflicts to come. But the Keth had learned an important lesson. The species they had dismissed as weak and helpless could be far more dangerous than they appeared. Word spread throughout their empire about the lone human who had turned from prey into predator, taking down an entire hunting vessel with nothing but determination and skill. Other alien species took notice as well. Humanity's reputation changed overnight from that of helpless newcomers to dangerous opponents who should not be underestimated. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and it would never be the same again. 3 months after the rescue, Marcus Chin stood before a gathering of representatives from 12 different alien species. The emergency session of the Galactic Trade Council had been called specifically to address what many were now calling the human problem. The conference chamber on Nexus Station buzzed with nervous energy as delegates whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. Marcus wore his dress uniform, the silver star of the Colonial Cross visible on his chest alongside his other decorations. The medal had been awarded for his actions aboard the Keth hunting vessel, but he knew that many of the aliens present saw it as a symbol of human aggression rather than heroism. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, humanity's chief representative to the Galactic Trade Council, stood at the central podium. She was a veteran diplomat who had spent years building relationships with alien species, trying to establish humanity as a trustworthy member of the galactic community. The accusations being made against my people are both unfair and unfounded, Ambassador Vasquez said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. Sergeant Chin acted in self-defense after being illegally captured and tortured by Keth raiders. His actions were entirely justified under galactic law. The response came from Counselor Vextar, a tall insectoid representing the Zalari Collective. His compound eyes glittered as he activated his translation device. Self-defense does not explain the systematic execution of enemy combatants or the capture of military intelligence. This human displayed tactics more sophisticated than most species achieve after centuries of warfare. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zalari had been spacefaring for over 2,000 years and considered themselves experts on military matters. To them, the idea that a primitive human could outfight experienced Keth warriors was deeply troubling. Marcus had been briefed on the political situation during his journey to Nexus Station. Humanity's rapid technological advancement and military success had alarmed many of the older species. They remembered when humans first made contact 50 years ago, arriving in crude ships with barely functional faster-than-light drives. Now human vessels were being built with improvements that surpassed some civilizations with millennia of experience. The fear wasn't entirely unjustified. Human colonies had expanded rapidly across dozens of star systems, protected by increasingly sophisticated defense fleets. The colonial navy had evolved from a small patrol force into a formidable military organization capable of projecting power across multiple sectors. Perhaps the counselor would prefer that I had allowed myself and my fellow prisoners to be sold into slavery, Marcus said, rising from his seat. Or should I have waited politely for rescue while my crewmates were tortured to death for entertainment? Counselor Vextar's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus had learned was a sign of irritation. Your individual actions are not the issue, Sergeant. The concern is what those actions represent about your species' potential for violence. No known species has achieved such combat effectiveness with so little formal training. The truth was more complex than either side wanted to admit. Humans weren't naturally superior fighters, but they possessed certain advantages that other species lacked. Their evolutionary background as pursuit predators had given them exceptional endurance and problem-solving abilities under stress. More importantly, human military doctrine emphasized adaptability and individual initiative rather than rigid adherence to established protocols. Ambassador Vasquez activated a holographic display showing casualty figures from recent conflicts. If the Council is concerned about violence, perhaps we should examine the Keth raid that started this incident. They destroyed an unarmed research vessel and murdered nearly 200 civilians. Yet no emergency sessions were called to address Keth aggression. The point struck home. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering their own species' experiences with Keth raiders. The warrior culture had been terrorizing the galaxy's frontier regions for decades, but most civilizations had simply written off the affected areas as acceptable losses. The Keth are a known quantity, replied Counselor THYSS from the Aquarian Federation. Her gill slits fluttered as she spoke, a sign of agitation. They have always been raiders and pirates, but they follow predictable patterns. Humans appear to be something entirely different. Marcus studied the assembled delegates and realized that their fear wasn't really about human military capabilities. It was about uncertainty. The galaxy's established powers had spent centuries learning to coexist through carefully negotiated treaties and trade agreements. Humanity's rapid rise threatened to disrupt that stability. The session was interrupted by an aide who whispered urgently into Ambassador Vasquez's ear. Her expression darkened as she received the message, and Marcus felt a familiar tension in the air that usually preceded bad news. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored delegates, the ambassador announced, I've just received word that a Keth battle fleet has attacked the human colony on Kepler Prime. Initial reports indicate heavy casualties and significant infrastructure damage. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates activated their communication devices and began speaking rapidly to their respective governments. Marcus felt his jaw clench as he processed the implications. Kepler Prime was home to over 2 million colonists, including many families of active military personnel. Counselor Vextar called for order, his voice cutting through the noise. This tragic development only reinforces the need for measured discussion about humanity's role in galactic affairs. Perhaps if humans had not provoked the Keth through their aggressive actions, provoked them, Marcus stood abruptly, his voice filled with controlled anger. We destroyed one raiding vessel that had attacked us without cause. Are you suggesting that self-defense is provocation? The Zalari counselor's compound eyes focused on Marcus with what might have been contempt. Your species has declared war on the Keth Empire through your actions. Now you drag the rest of the galaxy into your conflict. Ambassador Vasquez placed a restraining hand on Marcus's arm, but he was beyond diplomatic niceties. 3 months of watching alien delegates debate humanity's right to exist while civilians died had pushed him past his breaking point. You want to know what makes humans different? Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. We don't abandon our people. We don't write off colonies as acceptable losses. And we sure as hell don't sit in comfortable chambers debating politics while innocent people are being murdered. He activated his personal communication device and began speaking into it. Colonel Harrison, this is Sergeant Chun. I'm requesting immediate reactivation to full duty status. Kepler Prime needs every experienced soldier we can get. The response was immediate. Request granted, Sergeant. Report to the CNS Retribution at your earliest convenience. We're assembling a task force to relieve Kepler Prime. Several delegates protested as Marcus prepared to leave. They demanded that humanity submit to Galactic Council oversight before taking any military action. Some threatened economic sanctions if humans acted unilaterally. Marcus turned to face them one final time. You've spent 3 months debating whether my species has the right to defend itself. Meanwhile, real people are dying. If you want to impose sanctions or restrictions, go ahead. But don't expect us to ask permission to protect our own. As he left the chamber, Marcus heard Ambassador Vasquez attempting to salvage the diplomatic situation. Her efforts were important for humanity's long-term relationship with other species, but there would be time for politics after the immediate crisis was resolved. The CNS Retribution was a massive battlecruiser representing the latest in human military technology. Its designers had studied captured alien vessels and incorporated the best features into a uniquely human design philosophy. The ship emphasized speed, flexibility, and overwhelming firepower rather than the massive armor and weapons that other species preferred. Colonel Harrison greeted Marcus personally as he came aboard. The officer was a veteran of the Centauri campaign who had earned his rank through battlefield promotions rather than political connections. "Good to have you back, Sergeant," Harrison said, leading Marcus through the ship's corridors. "We've been analyzing the Keth attack patterns, and your experience with their tactics could be valuable. They're using different strategies than we've seen before." The briefing room was filled with officers studying holographic displays of the Kepler Prime system. The colony world was under siege by a fleet of 30 Keth vessels, including several dreadnoughts that hadn't been seen outside their home territory before. It was the largest military operation in their recorded history. "Intelligence suggests this is more than a simple raid," explained Major Torres from the Strategic Analysis Division. "They're deploying siege equipment and establishing permanent bases on the planet's surface. This appears to be a full invasion rather than their usual hit-and-run tactics." Marcus studied the tactical displays and felt a chill of recognition. The attack patterns matched descriptions he had found in the capture data from the hunting vessel. The Keth weren't just seeking revenge for their losses. They were implementing a pre-existing plan to test humanity's military capabilities. "This is reconnaissance in force," he said, pointing to specific deployments on the holographic map. "They're probing our response times, fleet coordination, and defensive strategies. Whatever they learn here will be used to plan larger operations against other human colonies." The implications were sobering. If the Keth were preparing for total war against humanity, other alien species would be forced to choose sides. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace for centuries was about to collapse. The relief fleet assembled at the edge of the Kepler Prime system consisted of 18 human vessels, including the Retribution and 2 other battlecruisers. It was an impressive force by human standards, but significantly outnumbered by the Keth siege fleet. Admiral Chun, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname, commanded the task force from the battlecruiser CNS Defiant. Her strategy focused on mobility and precision strikes rather than direct confrontation. Human ships would use their superior speed to attack the Keth fleet supply lines, while smaller vessels evacuated civilians from the planet's surface. The battle for Kepler Prime began with a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to disrupt Keth operations without triggering a massive retaliation. Human frigates and destroyers struck at transport vessels and fuel depots while the main battle fleet remained hidden in the system's asteroid belt. Marcus participated in several boarding actions against Keth supply ships. His experience fighting aboard their vessels proved invaluable as human assault teams learned to counter alien tactics and technology. Each successful operation provided intelligence about Keth capabilities and strategic planning. The turning point came when human forces captured a Keth command vessel carrying detailed plans for the invasion. The documents revealed that Kepler Prime was intended as a test case for a much larger campaign against human space. If successful, the Keth planned to attack every human colony simultaneously in a coordinated strike that would cripple humanity before they could mount an effective defense. Armed with this intelligence, Admiral Chun made a bold decision. Instead of continuing the cautious approach, she ordered a direct assault on the Keth siege fleet. The element of surprise and superior human coordination would have to compensate for their numerical disadvantage. The Battle of Kepler Prime became the largest space engagement in human history. 30 Keth vessels faced 18 human ships in a desperate struggle that would determine the fate of 2 million colonists. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, with both sides taking heavy casualties. Marcus found himself aboard the CNS Retribution as it engaged a Keth dreadnought at point-blank range. The massive enemy vessel was nearly twice the size of a human battlecruiser, but its designers had prioritized armor and heavy weapons over maneuverability. Human tactics emphasized speed and precision over brute force. The duel between the two ships lasted for 3 hours, with both vessels taking significant damage. The Retribution's superior fire control systems eventually found weak spots in the dreadnought's armor, allowing concentrated fire to penetrate the enemy vessel's defenses. As the Keth fleet began to retreat, Marcus realized that the battle had accomplished more than just saving Kepler Prime. Humanity had proven that they could stand against any alien threat, regardless of size or technological advantage. The psychological impact of the victory would resonate throughout the galaxy. News of the human victory spread rapidly through galactic communication networks. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers suddenly found themselves reconsidering their assumptions. The Keth Empire, previously considered one of the galaxy's dominant military powers, had been defeated by a species that barely 50 years ago had been confined to a single star system. The political ramifications were immediate and far-reaching. Several alien species began requesting mutual defense treaties with humanity, while others retreated into isolation rather than risk confrontation. The Galactic Trade Council found itself powerless to impose restrictions on a species that had demonstrated such formidable military capabilities. For Marcus, the victory at Kepler Prime represented something more personal. It helped prove that humans were not the helpless prey that many aliens believe them to be. When threatened, humans could become hunters more dangerous than anything the galaxy had seen before. The war with the Keth Empire was far from over, but humanity had established itself as a force to be respected. Other species would think twice before threatening human colonies or treating human lives as expendable. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. As the relief fleet prepared to return to human space, Marcus looked out at the stars and wondered what challenges lay ahead. The galaxy was vast and filled with unknown dangers, but humanity had proven that they belonged among its defenders. Whatever came next, they would face it as equals rather than victims. The hunter had become the apex predator, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Prime, Marcus Chun found himself in a position he had never expected to occupy. The newly constructed headquarters of Human Strategic Command bustled with activity as officers from a dozen different species worked alongside human personnel. The war against the Keth Empire had evolved into something much larger, a galactic alliance against tyranny that no one had seen coming. Marcus's promotion to Major had come with an assignment to the Alien Integration Division, a new department created to coordinate military operations with humanity's unexpected allies. His office walls displayed tactical maps of 17 different star systems where joint human-alien forces were conducting operations against Keth strongholds. The morning briefing brought disturbing news from the Outer Rim territories. Commander Sarah Okafor, recently returned from a reconnaissance mission in the Vega sector, activated a holographic display showing damaged colonies and burning space stations. The Keth have changed tactics again, she reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. They're no longer trying to capture territory for their empire. This is pure scorched earth strategy. Destroy everything that could be useful to their enemies. The images showed the aftermath of attacks on 3 different worlds. Entire cities had been reduced to radioactive craters. Orbital manufacturing facilities had been systematically destroyed. Even agricultural areas had been contaminated with biological agents that would make the soil sterile for decades. Major Torres from Strategic Analysis provided context for the devastation. Intelligence suggests that the Keth leadership has concluded they cannot win a conventional war against the human-led alliance. They're attempting to make the cost of victory so high that we'll accept a negotiated settlement. Marcus studied the tactical data and felt a familiar chill of recognition. He had seen similar patterns in the captured files from the original hunting vessel, but the scale was unprecedented. The Keth weren't just fighting for territory anymore. They were fighting for their civilization's survival. How many casualties? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. Preliminary estimates suggest over 50 million dead across all three systems, Commander Okafor replied. Most were civilians who couldn't evacuate in time. The Keth specifically targeted refugee transports and medical facilities. The briefing room fell silent as the officers absorbed the magnitude of the atrocity. This was genocide on a scale that surpassed anything in recorded galactic history. Even species that had initially opposed human expansion were calling for immediate military intervention. Admiral Zhang, the commanding officer of Human Strategic Command, entered the briefing room with news that would change everything. Behind her came an alien that Marcus had never seen before, tall, ethereal, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Ambassador Kaishan of the Ethereal Collective, Admiral Zhang announced. Her people have been monitoring the galactic situation from their home dimension, and they've decided to offer assistance. Marcus had heard rumors about the Ethereals, but never expected to meet one. They were said to be the oldest known sentient species, having achieved interstellar travel when most other civilizations were still discovering fire. For millennia, they had remained isolated in pocket dimensions, observing, but never interfering in galactic affairs. Ambassador Kaishan spoke with a voice like crystal bells, her words carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the mind rather than the ears. The Keth Empire has committed acts of such profound evil that the Ethereal Collective can no longer remain neutral. We offer our knowledge and technology to help end their reign of terror. The implications were staggering. Ethereal technology was generations ahead of anything else in the galaxy. Their ships could travel between dimensions, their weapons could manipulate matter at the quantum level, and their sensors could detect threats across vast distances of space and time. What do you want in return? Admiral Zhang asked, her diplomatic training making her suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true. Nothing that you would consider a sacrifice, Ambassador Kaishan replied. We ask only that humanity continue to be what you have proven yourselves to be, protectors of the innocent and defenders of justice. The galaxy needs such guardians. The meeting continued for several hours as alien and human officers worked together to plan the final offensive against the Keth Empire. Ethereal dimensional technology would allow the Alliance fleet to bypass enemy defenses and strike directly at their home systems. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history. Marcus found himself assigned as the human liaison to an ethereal strike team that would target the Keth High Command. The mission would require infiltrating the enemy capital world and capturing or eliminating the war leaders responsible for the genocide. It was exactly the kind of dangerous assignment that his unique experience had prepared him for. The ethereal ship that transported the strike team was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The vessel existed partially in normal space and partially in dimension that human science couldn't fully comprehend. Walking through its corridors felt like moving through a dream where the laws of physics were more like suggestions than absolute rules. His ethereal teammate, who called herself Lyrius, explained their capabilities during the journey to Keth space. My people learned long ago that violence rarely solves fundamental problems, she said, her harmonics conveying sadness. But sometimes evil must be stopped by force before wisdom can prevail. The infiltration of the Keth homeworld was surprisingly easy. Ethereal technology allowed the strike team to phase through solid matter and become invisible to most detection systems. They materialized directly inside the throne chamber where the Keth Emperor held court, surrounded by his most powerful war leaders. Emperor Grakthos was even larger than war leader Thax had been, his scales bearing the scars of countless battles. Around him stood 12 of the most feared warriors in Keth history, each one responsible for the destruction of multiple worlds. The chamber itself was decorated with trophies taken from conquered civilizations, a monument to centuries of brutality and oppression. Marcus had expected a fierce battle when they revealed themselves, but the Keth response was something he hadn't anticipated. Instead of attacking immediately, Emperor Grakthos studied the intruders with what appeared to be curiosity rather than rage. "So," the Emperor rumbled in his deep voice, "the humans have finally come for us." I wondered how long it would take for the hunt to reach its inevitable conclusion. The war leaders around the throne reached for their weapons, but Grakthos gestured for them to stop. "No," he said firmly. "This human earned the right to face us through strength. We will honor that achievement." Marcus realized that the Emperor was referring to his original escape from the hunting vessel. News of that incident had apparently spread throughout the Keth Empire, becoming a legend that had altered their perception of humanity. To them, he was no longer prey, but a worthy adversary. "Your people have committed genocide," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much death. 50 million innocent civilians murdered in the last month alone. "This ends now." Emperor Grakthos nodded slowly. "Yes, it does end, but perhaps not in the way you expect." The Emperor activated a control device, and the chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the vast city that surrounded the palace. Marcus could see millions of Keth civilians going about their daily lives, unaware that their world was about to become a battleground. "Your Alliance fleet has surrounded our system," Grakthos continued. "We have detected their presence despite their dimensional technology. If we fight here, billions will die. My people, your people, and the civilians caught between us." Lyrius stepped forward, her ethereal form shimmering with barely contained energy. "You speak of civilian casualties after ordering the murder of 50 million innocents. Your concerns seem selective." The Emperor's yellow eyes fixed on her with something that might have been regret. "You are correct, ethereal. My war leaders convinced me that terror tactics would break enemy morale. I realize now that we have only succeeded in proving our own monstrosity." One of the war leaders, a scarred veteran named Vactor, snarled his disagreement. "The humans started this war when they killed war leader Thax. We are only responding to their aggression." Marcus felt his temper flare. Thax died because he was torturing innocent prisoners for entertainment. If defending civilians makes us aggressors, then I'm proud to be one. The confrontation continued for several tense minutes as both sides debated the ethics of warfare and the responsibility for escalating conflicts. It was clear that some Keth leaders genuinely believed they were fighting a defensive war, while others were simply using that as an excuse for atrocities they had always wanted to commit. The deadlock was broken when Lyrius activated her dimensional sensors and detected massive energy buildups throughout the Keth fleet. The war leaders had been stalling for time while their ships prepared for a final desperate attack against the Alliance forces. "Your generals are planning to detonate your fleet's reactors inside the Alliance formation," she announced. "The explosion would destroy both fleets and irradiate this entire system." Emperor Grakthos spun to face his subordinates, his massive form radiating fury. "I gave no such order," he roared. "Who authorized this madness?" War leader Vactor stepped forward defiantly. "The decision was made by the Council of Claws. We will not surrender our empire to alien invaders, even if it means dying with honor." The revelation split the Keth leadership into two factions. Half supported the Emperor's desire to find a negotiated solution, while the others backed the war leader's plan for mutual destruction. The argument that followed provided crucial intelligence about Keth internal politics and military organization. Marcus realized that this was the moment that would define not just the end of the war, but humanity's future relationship with the rest of the galaxy. The easy solution would be to eliminate all the Keth leaders and let the Alliance fleet destroy their civilization. But that would make humans no better than the tyrants they had fought against. There's another option, he said, interrupting the debate between the feuding Keth factions. Emperor Grakthos, are you willing to surrender yourself for trial on genocide charges? The massive alien leader considered the question for long moments before nodding slowly. If it will save my people from destruction, yes. I will face whatever justice you deem appropriate. And your war leaders? Those who committed atrocities will face trial. Those who fought honorably will be exiled but allowed to live. The Emperor's gaze fixed on Vactor. As for those who would murder billions to avoid accountability, they will be dealt with according to Keth law. What followed was the most complex surrender negotiation in galactic history. Emperor Grakthos used his remaining authority to order the stand-down of all Keth military forces, while Marcus coordinated with the Alliance fleet to prevent the planned reactor detonations. Several war leaders attempted to resist the surrender order, leading to brief but intense fighting aboard their vessels. The trials that followed established new principles for galactic justice and military conduct. Emperor Grakthos was sentenced to life imprisonment, but was allowed to testify about Keth culture and history. His cooperation helped the Alliance understand how a warrior civilization had devolved into a genocidal empire. Many of the war leaders faced execution for their crimes, but others received lesser sentences based on their individual actions. The Keth Empire was dissolved, with its territory divided among the surviving populations and placed under Alliance supervision. For Marcus, the end of the war brought both relief and uncertainty. He had helped prove that humans could be effective defenders of galactic peace, but the responsibility that came with that role was enormous. Other species looked to humanity for leadership in ways that made some people uncomfortable. The ethereal collective's decision to emerge from isolation had also changed the balance of power in ways that no one fully understood. Their technology and wisdom were invaluable, but their true motivations remained mysterious. Ambassador Kaishon spoke of humanity's role as galactic guardians, but what did that really mean? The answer came during the victory celebration on Nexus Station, where representatives from dozens of species gathered to commemorate the end of the war. Marcus found himself standing with Admiral Zhang and Ambassador Vasquez as they watched the diverse crowd of humans and aliens working together to build a better future. 6 months ago, half these species wanted to impose restrictions on human expansion, Admiral Zhang observed. Now, they're asking us to help police their own territories. Ambassador Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. Power brings responsibility. The question is whether we are wise enough to use our influence constructively. Marcus thought about his journey from research officer to military leader to galactic peacekeeper. Each step had required him to become something he had never expected to be. Maybe that's what makes humans different, he said. We don't just adapt to new situations. We transform ourselves to meet them. As he watched human and alien children playing together in the station's recreation areas, Marcus realized that the real victory wasn't military. It was the proof that different species could work together despite their differences. The Keth Empire had fallen not because humanity was more violent than other civilizations, but because humans had inspired others to be better than they thought possible. The galaxy was entering a new era, one where cooperation was replacing conquest, and justice was becoming more important than power. There would be new challenges ahead, new threats to face, and new responsibilities to accept. But for the first time in galactic history, there was hope that wisdom might triumph over force. The hunter had evolved into something greater, a guardian of all who needed protection. 5 years after the fall of the Keth Empire, Major Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of the massive space station that had become the new center of galactic civilization. New Harmony Station orbited a neutron star at the intersection of 7 major hyperspace routes, making it the perfect location for the headquarters of the Galactic Defense Alliance. The view from the observation deck showed the most diverse fleet ever assembled. Human battlecruisers flew alongside ethereal dimension ships, Centauri exploration vessels, and even reformed Keth patrol craft. Representatives from over 40 different species worked together to maintain peace across hundreds of star systems. Marcus wore the insignia of the Alliance Special Operations Command, a new organization created to handle threats that required expertise from multiple species. His current assignment involved investigating reports of a new danger from the galactic rim, something that had both ethereal sensors and human intelligence networks deeply concerned. Commander Lisa Park, his second-in-command, approached with the latest intelligence briefings. Her background in xenobiology had proved invaluable as the Alliance encountered new species and threats. The deep space monitoring stations have confirmed it, she reported. 3 more colonies have gone silent in the Omega sector. That makes 17 in the past 2 months. The pattern was unlike anything they had seen before. Entire worlds were simply ceasing all communications without any distress signals or signs of struggle. When investigation teams arrived, they found empty cities with no trace of the inhabitants. Buildings stood intact, technology continued functioning, but every living creature had simply vanished. Any commonalities between the affected worlds? Marcus asked, studying the tactical displays that showed the locations of the disappeared colonies. All of them were recently established settlements with small populations. Most were joint colonies with mixed human and alien populations. The only consistent factor is that they were all located along the edge of mapped space. Marcus felt the familiar chill that came with encountering a truly unknown threat. The Alliance had dealt with pirates, rogue artificial intelligences, and even interdimensional parasites, but this was different. Something was systematically harvesting entire populations with technology that left no trace. The briefing was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Zhang, who had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Alliance forces. Her image appeared on the observation deck's main display, looking grim despite the secure quantum encryption protecting their conversation. Major Chun, we've received a communication from the disappeared colony on Altair 7, she announced. It came through yesterday, 3 weeks after the colony went silent. The implications sent a shock through Marcus. If the colonists were still alive weeks after their disappearance, it suggested they had been taken rather than killed. But taken where and by whom? The communication was brief and terrifying. A young girl's voice spoke in simple English, though the words seemed to come from very far away. "Help us," she whispered. "They took us to the place where stars are born. The light hurts, but we can't close our eyes. They want to know how we think, how we feel. They're taking us apart to understand." The message ended with sounds that human technology couldn't properly analyze. Harmonics that existed in frequencies beyond normal space, accompanied by what might have been screaming or singing. The audio engineers who studied the recording described it as the most disturbing thing they had ever encountered. Have ethereals provided any insights? Marcus asked, knowing that their dimensional senses often detected threats that conventional technology missed. Admiral Zhang's expression darkened further. That's the problem. The ethereals are more frightened by this than we've ever seen them. Ambassador Keishan described it as something that should not exist in our reality. She's requested an emergency meeting with all Alliance leaders. The emergency session convened in the station's highest security chamber, protected by both human technology and ethereal dimensional barriers. Representatives from every major species attended, their expressions reflecting various degrees of concern and confusion. Ambassador Keishan materialized in the center of the chamber, her usually serene demeanor replaced by visible agitation. When ethereal showed fear, it was time for everyone else to panic. The entities responsible for these disappearances are not from our dimension, she announced without preamble. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on conscious thought and emotional energy. We have encountered them before, in the distant past when my people were young and foolish. The revelation that even the ancient ethereals had faced this threat was sobering. Marcus leaned forward in his seat, his military instincts recognizing the tone of someone who had witnessed genuine horror. "What happened when your people encountered them before?" he asked. Kayshawn's harmonics carried undertones of grief that made everyone present feel a deep sadness. "We try to study them, to understand their nature through scientific observation. The result was the loss of half our population and the near destruction of our civilization. We only survived by retreating into dimensional isolation and sealing ourselves away from normal space." The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed the implications. If the ethereals, with all their advanced technology and wisdom, had barely survived an encounter with these entities, what chance did the younger species have? "Are you saying we should abandon the affected sectors?" asked Counselor Vextar, his compound eyes reflecting fear despite his species' usual confidence. "Abandonment will not save you," Kayshawn replied. "These entities are drawn to consciousness itself. They will consume every thinking being in the galaxy unless they are stopped. But the methods that might succeed require sacrifices that I pray you will never need to make." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As one of the Alliance's most experienced special operations officers, he would inevitably be involved in any mission to confront this threat. The question was whether conventional military tactics could work against beings that existed outside normal reality. The meeting continued for hours as scientists and military leaders tried to develop strategies for fighting an enemy they didn't understand. The ethereals provided what information they could, but much of their knowledge was restricted by dimensional barriers they dared not cross. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim, the biologist who had survived the original Keth capture, had been studying the audio message from Altair 7. Her analysis revealed patterns that suggested the missing colonists might still be conscious and attempting to communicate. The voice modulations follow mathematical sequences that match human neural patterns under extreme stress, she explained during her presentation. But there are also harmonics that don't match any known species. Something is amplifying their thoughts and broadcasting them across dimensional boundaries. The discovery led to the development of new communication protocols that might allow contact with the missing populations. If the colonists were still alive, they might be able to provide intelligence about their captors' capabilities and weaknesses. Marcus volunteered to lead the first contact mission, using a heavily modified exploration vessel equipped with both human technology and ethereal dimensional systems. The ship would approach the last known position of the disappeared colonies and attempt to establish communication with the entities responsible. The journey to the Omega sector took 3 weeks through hyperspace, during which the crew prepared for an encounter unlike anything in their experience. Marcus assembled a team that included specialists from 6 different species, each bringing unique perspectives on consciousness, dimensional physics, and xenobiology. Commander Park served as his executive officer, while Dr. Kim led the scientific team. The ship also carried 2 ethereal advisors who had volunteered despite their species' fear of the entities. Their presence was essential, as they were the only ones who might recognize signs of dimensional intrusion. As they approached the edge of mapped space, the ship's sensors began detecting anomalies that defied explanation. Stars appeared and disappeared without warning. Space itself seemed to fluctuate between different states of existence. Most disturbing were the readings that suggested conscious thought patterns scattered across empty space. "We're detecting neural activity in areas where no life should exist," Dr. Kim reported from the science station. "The patterns are consistent with multiple species, but they're distributed across thousands of cubic kilometers of vacuum." Marcus studied the sensor data and felt a growing understanding of what they were facing. The entities weren't just capturing populations. They were somehow converting consciousness into a form that could exist independently of physical bodies. The first direct contact came when they entered orbit around the world where Altair 7 had been located. The planet was still there, but it had been transformed into something that hurt to look at. The surface rippled like liquid, while maintaining the appearance of solid matter. Cities phased in and out of existence, sometimes showing the familiar architecture of human colonies, other times revealing structures that followed no known geometry. Marcus came a voice through the ship's communication system, though no signal was being transmitted through normal space. "You came for us. We knew you would." The voice belonged to Colonel Harrison, Marcus's former commanding officer who had been visiting Altair 7 when the colony disappeared. But there was something wrong with the voice, as if it was being filtered through layers of reality that changed its fundamental nature. "Colonel, what's your status? Are the colonists safe?" "Safe is not a word that has meaning here," Harrison replied. "We exist, but not as we were. They study us, learn from us, change us. We are becoming something new, whether we want to or not." The conversation continued as Marcus tried to gather intelligence about their captors. What emerged was a picture of beings so alien that human language struggled to describe them. They existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, experiencing reality in ways that no three-dimensional species could comprehend. The entities viewed consciousness as the galaxy's most precious resource, something to be collected, studied, and preserved in forms that transcended physical limitations. From their perspective, they were saving the colonists by freeing them from the constraints of matter and energy. "They don't understand why we resist," Harrison explained, his voice fading in and out as if transmitted across vast distances. "To them, consciousness trapped in physical form is like seeing butterflies pinned to display boards. They think they're setting us free." Marcus realized that conventional warfare would be useless against such beings. You couldn't fight entities that existed partially outside reality, and their motivations weren't based on territorial expansion or resource acquisition. They were collecting consciousness the way human scientists might collect specimens. The solution, when it came, required cooperation between species that had never worked together before. The ethereals provided dimensional technology that could create barriers between realities. Human engineers designed focusing systems that could concentrate conscious thought into coherent patterns. Other species contributed their own unique perspectives on the nature of existence itself. The plan was ambitious and dangerous. Instead of trying to fight the entities directly, the Alliance would create a dimensional sanctuary where consciousness could exist safely without physical form. The displaced populations would be given a choice: return to their physical bodies with the knowledge that the entities might eventually find them again, or accept existence in a new form that would be forever beyond the entity's reach. The implementation required Marcus to make a sacrifice he had never anticipated. The dimensional barriers needed a conscious guide who could exist in both realities simultaneously. Someone would have to volunteer to become partially non-physical, serving as an eternal guardian of the sanctuary. "I'll do it," Marcus said simply when the requirements became clear. "I started this journey by becoming a hunter. Now I need to become something else." The transformation process was unlike anything in recorded history. Marcus's consciousness was carefully separated from his physical form while maintaining the connections that defined his identity. He became a being of pure thought and, capable of existing across multiple dimensions, but